Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I am Tahir Dhindsa and you're watching SDTV. The annual budget, federal budget is around the corner. What is budget? It is procurement for the next financial year. But for procurement, you need money. And the government has to raise money through different means, may it be remittances or whatever means. But the fiscal effort is the main effort. Procurement list is there, but there is no money to procure those things. Lot of deficit. And how to get that money through fiscal means? Is it a just fiscal means or it's unjust? And who is the victim? And this is a big debate that is going on. And that promotes expectations and do's and don'ts and government's excuses, lame or otherwise. To discuss all that in nutshell and brief, we have invited a very eminent journalist who every day, every now and then writes all these things for his newspaper and other publications with all his experience that he has, usually at the cutting edge. Khurram Husain, very warm welcome. Please say something on what I've just said as a basic premise, and then we'll rumble on the discussion. What I was talking before this interview, I don't want to color your mind.
Sir, with this budget, the forthcoming budget, I think the state of Pakistan is now, not just this government, but the state, is surrendering all attempts to try and tackle the economy's many dysfunctions. Among those dysfunctions, some are relevant to the budget, some are not. So those that are, for example, include efforts like broadening of the tax base and rationalization of expenditures to ensure that government spends only in those areas where they get a solid bang for the buck in terms of material benefits for the people or for economic growth, or that it spends in a way that is responsive to the needs of the people, as those needs are transmitted upwards through the normal processes of democracy and of a democratic functioning polity. What we are now seeing happen with the budget is that all of this is being abandoned. And instead, we have a raw revenue numbers exercise on the one hand, and heavy, which is on the revenue side, and heavy political bargaining to preserve the vested interests of specific political parties and their key constituents within the assemblies in the form of the bargaining over the development budget, which you're seeing, the failure to so far convene and arrive at a consensus in the National Economic Council speaks to the fact that this consensus is eluding them so far. So you've got one kind of politics playing on one end, a complete surrender of a policy effort on the other. And what we have is a budget that could be as sterile and perhaps as, if I may say so, meaningless and ceremonial an exercise as I think I've seen in at least well over a decade so far.
Why are you saying now? Because the budget is round the corner, it's coming in 1 or 2 days. Why are you saying that?
I'm saying that because I see absolutely no work being done to try and address one of the key deficiencies on the revenue side of the equation. And let's face it, many of our budgets are basically about the revenue side. They are about the revenue plan through which the government intends to procure next fiscal year's incremental revenues. That's what the real game is about, right? If you collected X amount of revenue this year, you plan to collect then incremental above that, let's say 20% or so above that for next year. Where will that incremental budget revenue come from? Some of it comes from raw nominal growth through economic growth, through inflation, but some of it comes from and right now, whatever new revenue measures, as of last year, what we've been seeing is that they come up with are not new at all. They're either taxing those who are already compliant more and more heavily, increasing the burden on the common citizenry as well as the business and industrial community of this country, manufacturers. While at the same time, if they are rolling out something to broaden the base, these are the oldest, most tried and tested measures that have failed in the past, such as a fixed tax on retailers based on their turnover. These are old steps that have been done. You can go 10 years back in time and see similar things being done. So, if that's all we're going to do, rehash old ideas in an attempt to solve old problems, ideas that have already been tried and failed, and we don't see any actual mind being applied on the side of the on the revenue side of the equation, then seriously, it just looks like a government that's standing in surrender before its own dysfunction.
Right. I totally agree with you that the fiscal side is at the heart of economy, especially the government side. But where is the fiscal cushion from where you say that the government should go and pull out? Where is that well that from which they had to pump it out? Where is that fiscal water?
The biggest fiscal water would be found in the services sector that has grown the fastest over the decades. And its contribution to the revenue, to the government's revenue, has not kept pace with the speed with which the sector itself has grown. So, if the sector accounted for services accounted for less than half of Pakistan's GDP in the 1980s, today it accounts for almost two-thirds of Pakistan's total GDP. Its revenue contribution is nowhere near comparable. And whatever revenue contribution services does make tends to come very heavily from telecoms and banks, the two components of the services sector that are documented and whose transactions are visible to the state and can be easily reached. But the vast other majority of the services sector, whether we're talking wholesale, retail, transport, or storage, or hospitality,
Doctors.
yeah, professions and professional incomes, whether doctors or even chartered accountants, let's say, let's not them out, consultants, etc. Those are escaping the tax net, and their contribution to the exchequer in compared to their growth rate in proportion of Pakistan's GDP, the composition of Pakistan's GDP, is not keeping pace. So that's one of the wells that we talked about. Agricultural income is always another. Property development, property and real estate sector is a third. Those tend to fall in the provincial domain, but we do have a precedent in the past where the federal government and the provincial governments agree between themselves to delegate tax collection powers upwards, where the provincial governments say, okay, this is our domain, but we delegate it to you for collection. The sales tax on services is one example. Or in fact, the collection of the sales tax is one example where the provinces have delegated that to the federation, to the federal government to collect on behalf of the provinces and then share the proceeds via the NFC award. Where there's a will, there's a way, and they can, if they want, find a way to get the provinces to delegate agriculture incomes upward as well, similarly, or delegate uh, real estate, collection of tax from property developers and real estate, similarly. But there is no will, and as a result, there is no way.
Do you think politically government is very afraid? Because I still remember very long when Shaukat Aziz as a prime minister was about to, after that was to be in, the election was coming round the corner. The petroleum prices, the retail price was 60 rupees a litre. And according to the market mechanism, it should have been 18. But they did not increase the price, and that is the bulk from where the circular debt, you remember that. And now, because of the election, the incumbent government right now gets its voter, its support from the small commercial centers of the urban townships and cities and all that. Do you think it is possible for the government to put them under the mat and levy heavy tax on them? And I agree totally with you. Right now, where I'm sitting, there's a retail shop of who sells, I quoted so many times this, sells this electric and gas combined heaters. And in winter, one winter day, his sale was about 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 lakh rupees. of that old heroes category. And if he pays 25,000, it's nothing. It's cheating. I agree with you. But do you think politically it is possible for the government to go and hunt and or rather witch hunt the service sectors?
I, I think that's a subjective judgment. I would say yes, it is possible. I think politics is the art of the possible. It's a good politician is one who finds a way to do what needs to be done regardless. And a bad politician is the one who says, "Well, that the politics won't allow me to do this." It's the same principle as with, for example, brokers. A good broker can make money in a bad market. In the same way. So I think politically, we should not grant that excuse to the government that the politics are stacked up against them. They are in power, and at least for the ruling party, their party is in power in the largest province in the country as well, in Punjab. And for them to build consensus around issues is a lot easier and a lot more possible than it would have been for many other governments in a similar situation. I think there is a lack of will over here. And I think there's a lack of vision, definitely.
Lack of vision as well.
Lack of vision as well. I think this particular government came into power without without really having thought through what all will be required once they are in power. You might note, for example, that the Feb 24 election happened when the parties barely had enough time in which to release their manifestos. And usually a party has some time, and all parties release some kind of a manifesto before the election. And by and large, they try to implement, what is in that manifesto. If you look at, for example, the People's Party manifesto before the 2008 election, they say in that we will devolve power down to the provinces. We will strengthen the provincial governments. And that's something that they worked on and that they delivered. We look at Nawaz Sharif's manifesto, the PMLN's manifesto before 2013, and they said in that we will invest, we will launch mega projects, we will invest in roads and power plants, and we will do away with the power shortages that were gripping Pakistan in those days. And they delivered on that. Now, we can debate whether the manner of their delivery was good or bad, whether these targets were right or wrong. But what we can't debate is that this was the goal they identified, and then they worked to accomplish the goal. In Feb 24, we had no such goal being identified. We had no statement of any vision. And even when they came into power, simply executing the raw tasks of an IMF stabilization program were all that they were really focused on. And they achieved that stabilization. By about January of 2025, in my own writings, I started saying that we have reached peak stability. They have stabilized, the current account deficits have disappeared, foreign exchange reserves have been built up to supply more than 2 months of import cover. The fiscal deficit, or at least the primary balance on the fiscal deficit, has turned into a surplus. So they've actually stabilized the economy. But where do you go from here? That was the big question. Every time you stabilize the economy, the next question is, now what? And that's where they had no answer. And we've seen all of through 2025, one after another ad hoc kind of measures coming forward to try and just plug revenue gaps and keep the stabilization going, with no sense of how do you come out of stabilization and navigate your path back towards growth. And now that they are completing fiscal year 2026, and what we are seeing in the run-up to the budget, they've still not answered that question. And I think the window has closed. I don't think they have any longer an opportunity or time left in which to develop an answer to that question. They've missed the boat. And from here on, I think ad hoc measures is all that they'll be left to do. And one such ad hoc measure is this idea of a fixed tax on the turnover of retailers. In the past, they've even floated ideas to collect this through the electricity bill. There have been all kinds of these kind of measures. Let's see what they manage to do. But they've hit peak stability. They hit it a long time ago. You came as far as you can go via a stabilization program, and they are stuck inside that now. They can't break out, and there is no vision There is no set of policies among them. There's no conversation even among this government to try and figure out how to break out of that situation. And as a result, here we are, formulating the fourth budget, I believe, by the same set of people, and no way forward as such. So let's wait and see what they come up with on.
What you're saying, what I understood from what you have been saying from the last few minutes is that stabilization has not reached the peak, it has saturated. The only way forward, the only thing that can rescue now and can hold our hand, Pakistan's hand, is growth. If they can put up something on growth, growth is now the, which I don't think so it's possible with the IMF program. For that, you need a lot of confidence to wriggle out, like in India they did. They launched that expats bond, Pardesi bond. They shore up the money, they paid the IMF and asked them to, okay, now you leave. And then they never, in Manmohan Singh's program, and they never, and for the rest is history, that India has been financing its country and through growth always. So what you are saying is, if I'm right, you are saying that the way forward is through growth, and which I don't think so it's possible with the IMF program.
I would agree with that. I think growth is not possible right now in any case, even with or without the IMF program. The IMF program certainly applies a cap, because in order to stay within the targets that the program sets, it's very difficult to envision growth much beyond 4%. I think the program sees Pakistan ending with what, 4.5% or so, something along those lines. By the time the program ends in November or so, I think October or so, 2027. But even without the fund program, if there's gun for growth on present conditions, I think within a year, maximum 18 months, they will blow the buffers that they have worked so hard to build. And the foreign exchange reserve, the current account deficit will return with a ferocity, as will the primary deficit on the fiscal account. And the reserves will begin to deplete. And I think within 18 months, Pakistan will be back to a situation,
to another program,
where the inflation is back, where the reserves have depleted to less than 1 month of import cover, and we are teetering on the edge of default, and then negotiating one more IMF program.
Right. Last question. Always in Pakistan, the budget has been an elite bargain, that you don't, you say, you spare that elite that should put into the growth, retail and other. Now the time is come, it's about time that without, it's not no more elite bargain which is possible, it's not going to give results. Now the bargain should be with the masses, where the question is not poverty, it's inequality. So there should be some reverse transfers of funds from vertically, from upward to downward. And how do you do that? Do you think this is the way forward, and government need to do that?
Well, sir, ideally, yes. I think reduction of inequality and creation on transfer of incomes to the lower levels of the income ladder are very important. I think the more demand you create from among the poor and the working poor, and let that demand then come up and drive investment decisions, I think that sort of makes sense in our time, that kind of an economics. Sadly, I don't see any such thing happening. The possibility of such a thing can only happen when you have a government that is rooted in the people, and the nature of whose power is answerable directly to the people. Only such a government can execute such a set of policies that you are talking about. But so long as the government itself in power is the result of an elite bargain itself, it does not derive its mandate and legitimacy to rule from the people that you have in mind, but from an elite bargain itself, then such a government is not going to be responsive. And you can see that in the operation, in the way this government operates, the ease with which, for example, they have stacked on the Petroleum Development Levy as the fastest growing revenue contributor ever. Okay, the petroleum taxes on electricity and fuels have never grown as rapidly as they have in the past 2 years. So the speed with which the government has passed on its dysfunction directly to the people via these taxes is to be noted. And I think that's the result of a government that is not really answerable to the people whom it is ruling over. And so you see it over there, but look at the people that it was consulting in the run up to the budget itself. You had all the billionaire elites of the country going to Islamabad in large delegations, and photographs being released of the prime minister sitting with around the table with a group of billionaires, the same billionaires we've been seeing over the decades. These are familiar faces to all of us, and there they were hammering out what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So I think so long as you have a government of this sort in the center, you're not going to get the kind of policies that you are talking about.
Khurram, thank you very much for sparing time. Indeed, you give a very valuable thoughts and observation on that. So the bottom line is that it's not possible for 10 million or 20 million people to act as a locomotive and pull the country. Now, it's need that the public should be involved, and whatever incentives are to be given in the budget should be given to those so they can take part. So this is inclusive strategy that need to be done, because exclusive growth has not trickled down in this country, and that is a fact. This we come to the end of the program. Bye for now.